Thank you guys for joining me. This conversation is going to be about, writing and the literary world and how it's been impacted by Palestine. And kind of one of the things that, led to planning this event was just some of the, conflicts within Pan America and the ruptures over Palestine. So I'm really excited about this conversation. I just want to quickly introduce our panelists. I have here next to me Viet Than Nguyen. He is the Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Sympathizer and its sequel, The Committed. And his most recent publication is A Man of Two Faces, a memoir, a history, a memorial. Thank you for joining us. And then I have here Yahya Ashour. He's a poet from Gaza, born and raised. He was an honorary fellow at University of Iowa, and we're really glad that he could join us. And then next we have Angela Flournoy. She is the author of the novel The Turner House, which was a finalist for the National Book Award. And her second novel, The Wounded Wilderness, will be released next year. Thank you so much for joining us, Angela. And finally, we have Randa Jarrar. She is an actor, filmmaker, professor, and the writer of 3 books that center Palestinian characters. Thank you, Randa, for joining us. So before we get into the heart of this discussion, how major institutions like literary organizations, universities, and media companies have struggled to meet this moment, Yahya, I'd like to have you start our discussion, since you are from Gaza. You were, as I know, and obviously tell me if I'm getting things wrong, you were in the US September of 2023, and you've been unable to return home since. What's it like, for you to watch what's been happening from afar? And can you give us a sense of what your family and friends have gone through?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much. It's really hard to talk about this. I feel like every time I think about it, or even like every time I get asked about it, this brain fog just controls my mind, and I really can't. It's like this is not my life. This is not what I'm going through, and it's very, very hard to process and like actually think about it. But at the same time, and I don't know if that will make sense, I think about it all the time. And one thing that I was very I lived 5 wars, survived 5 wars, if that's a word, in Gaza. And I really never imagined that just when I leave, the most brutal war and like genocide will happen. It felt like this is, I couldn't find words, I'm sorry. It felt like this is like very not real. Whenever I left, like especially now, the way I look at the world as a Gazan, it's an alternative reality. It's very hard to believe that there is a world that there is art and artists and writers and actual things that are happening. Of course, we have art in Gaza and we have writers, and I was writing, but seeing that here, like seeing what we watch on TV, and like a lot, we never had like a major artist or a major writer come to visit or talk to us or anything. It was always online if it ever happened. And the thing that I want to say is it's not just wars that I've survived, it's also siege. that I've survived 17 years of siege, and I'm only 26, so I really don't remember a time where life was normal. And when I got out, it was very hard to believe that there's actually a life outside of Gaza. And it's a life that is, that you can only see in your dreams. And people still complain about it. Yeah, so this was it. Right now, it's very hard to watch and see everything that my family and my friends have gone through. I've lost members of my extended family, 3 of them, and I've lost 15 friends. And I'm always like, I find it very heartbreaking that the only time that I actually make peace with what's happening is when I find myself, or I force myself to sleep and have nightmares. Nightmares of scenarios of what could have happened or what happened and I heard about it and what I lived and survived during these wars. This is the only way that I feel like I am really living with them, is through my nightmares. But as I say in one of the poems, I have to wake up again to check if they're actually alive, to check if, and they check how I'm doing about my absurd life and like everything like that. So it's been very hard. I always feel tired and I always have brain fog, and I'm always sleeping actually. Like if I don't know, like if you're a friend or if you know me, it's like I've either been sleeping, writing, editing, or traveling or performing. Nothing else. No cinema, no shows, nothing that would actually indicate that there is like a normal life. Anything that I would do, it will feel like a betrayal to my friends and family and the reality that Gazans are living. And this is something I want to say. One of the most impactful things that happened since the genocide have started was the student encampments, because it really reflected, this kind of support really reflected what Gazans are facing right now, living in refugee camps and struggling to access basic needs. And this is what many students have encountered and showed the world in these encampments. And I hope that all supporters here and everywhere around the world actually try to not just think about Gaza, but actually reach this level of compassion that they actually try for once to imagine their lives and live their lives. And I hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you, Yahya. I really appreciate that. And Randa, I want to go over to you if you can pass her the mic. Just to kind of continue to talk about the human impact. Randa, you went to Egypt recently and you had the chance to meet Palestinian refugees. If you don't mind sharing with us, what you saw and what it was like on the ground there.
Yeah, very similar to what you're talking about. A lot of the people that I had the honor of meeting in Cairo were recent evacuees, so a lot were still dealing with a lot of trauma, the state of dreams and nightmares, and there are no infrastructures on the ground to help them, except for a mutual aid and volunteer network, which predictably is being run by women of color and queers. I mean, it's you go anywhere and it's like they're taking care of everyone, right? And and a lot of the families are living in close quarters, so they're renting an apartment for a family of 3, and there's literally something like 4 or 5 families living there. And they just kind of want someone to talk to, and they want to know what's going on with the people they left behind, and they're constantly hearing about friends and family members passing away, and they're living in I myself left to Egypt because of a war when I was 13, and my father did too when he was 17, and that's actually how I became, because he kicked it to my mom outside a train station when they were both in their teens. A few years later made me. And so to go back with that background and knowing how hard it is to be in a place that not only doesn't have space for you, but pretends it does. Egypt is constantly like, oh, haram, like, يا رب يا حرام الفلسطينيين والله بس بقششيني عايز بقشيش, you know? Everybody just wants you to tip them, and people are struggling, and the government is complete and utter trash, obviously. They're making money off of the evacuees. It's $5,000 for an adult to evacuate. This is before the border was closed. So, or shut down by the Zionist entity. And there's a company there that's making millions of dollars off of these evacuations. So, and then people in hospitals are with folks who they evacuated, medically evacuated with, and those people who they evacuated with are not allowed to leave the hospital. So they're imprisoned in Egypt in these hospitals. And there's no guarantee that the people who are medically evacuated are even going to receive medical help. And if you know Egypt, you don't want to go to the hospital there anyway. Like literally, my uncle went once and came out, you know, they took his leg away, like just randomly. So it's already a hellscape, and they just want to go home. Like they're saying, I can't plant anything here. You know, I went to see the poet Musab Abu Toha, and his apartment there's grass, and I said, wow, look, you have greenery, and he's like, this is trash compared to what we have in Gaza. You know, I can't plant here, and even if I planted here, I don't feel like I'll be able to even pick the plants to use, because I always feel like I have to leave. So a lot of the people there, and actually the funds from this event are gonna go to mutual aid for evacuees in Cairo. So that's what this is gonna go towards. So if you get nothing out of this, just know that you put something forward towards that.
Thank you, Randa. So Randa, I'm going to ask you another question. So back in February, you were, you were dragged out of a protest action. You were dragged out of an event for a protest action that you took back in February during a Pen America event. And I was wondering, you know, for you now that you've gone to Egypt and you've had this experience of, you know, meeting refugees and hearing their stories, you know, what is the connection for you between, you know, protest and, you know, what's happening within literary institutions and the things that are affecting refugees on the ground?
I think it's a question about power, right? Like, I'm pretty sure, I heard today that people are really pissed off at Kundiman, but I completely like unplugged from that situation, because years ago I dealt with severe doxing connected to my professorship, and I realized then in 2018, it was 2018, that institutions they don't care about us at all. They never will. Literary institutions included. I mean, PALFest is great, right? Like, these are actual people who are behind PALFest, but it's not like it's this giant institution where, you know, a Zionist ex-CIA agent is running it. Like Pen America, that's actually what's happening. And the 30 million that they have is just what we know about the institution. There's so much more money being laundered through there. it was fun to be in New York and to speak at the Columbia People's Commencement, and to go directly from there. I went and had jerk chicken, of course, because I was in Harlem. And then I went to the Museum of Natural History, and we, with WAWAG, protested the Penn Gala, which is one of these money laundering moments. And it was just like this perfect day of protest and just shitting on them and just saying, you know, we do have power. There's power in these encampments, like what Yahya is saying. There's power in us voting uncommitted. There's power in us coming together and providing collective care and mutual aid for others and listening to their stories. And then there's all this, you know, anger, and it's sacred. The anger that we all feel and the sadness that we feel is sacred. And some of us are too traumatized, really, to enact that or work with that or kind of transform that or transmute it into something. But we just need time. And then there are those of us who are at the vanguard doing a lot of that work. And yeah, hopefully all of these sort of people in power and powerful spaces will get shat on, because that's what needs to happen.
Angela, the next question's for you, if you don't mind passing the mic, Randa. Angela, back in January, you cut ties with PEN America over their silence in Gaza, and subsequently the organization has been roiled by cancellations and resignations. What do you think led to that breaking point?
My breaking point with them?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think like some of the people in the last panel were talking about is if you have a group of creative people and you have a group of people who are supposed to be interested in considering the human condition, it is kind of bizarre to expect those people to not have passionate sort of objection to a bunch of human beings being murdered, right? So in that way, I felt like it was bizarre that PEN America would be expecting people to gotta hear both sides about something like this. But in another way, I was fully aware that a lot of institutions in this country, a lot of institutions who bill themselves as progressive, have a very clear "except for Palestine" policy. And for me, that is not, it's just not okay. I think it was one of those things, it was like in November, they asked me to co-host, it was just a party, and I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, and so I talked to people on staff there, and I said, what is going on? And they were like, well, you know, we just don't really take a political stance. But I'm like, you guys have all your press releases on your website, and there are so many political stances. So what do you mean, right? And I had a lot of conversations with people, and it became very clear that they wanted to just not have to talk about this genocide, and they also wanted to be able to platform people who were literally beating the drum for the genocide. Which was in the event that Randa was protesting, which I think subsequently now, after so many writers have organized against them, and even when we say against them, I think a lot of people who are not writers probably don't really understand how PEN functions. Randa, you mentioned how they have like at least $30 million, dollars. The bulk of their events are hosted, or the draw are writers, right? And if you do get paid to participate, which I have never gotten paid to do, you don't get paid a lot, right? So it is not a thing where it's like, you do it because you ostensibly believe in the mission of the organization. It is not a thing where the way that our writers were hurting them had to do with anything more really than saying, no, thank you. That's it, just no, thank you. If this is your stance, if you have you're supposed to be a freedom of expression / human rights organization, and if your stance is that that's cool for everyone except for Palestinians, and all we're saying is no thank you. And I think that the way in various publications, once their once they were shat on, once their events were not able to happen because enough writers said no thank you, there's been like all of this theorizing that this is authoritarian and that people are being shamed into being pressured not to work with PEN, when the reality is it's labor. This is labor that writers are providing for them because they believed in the cause. If you do not believe in the cause, why would you come sit on a panel like this for an organization that thinks that it's okay to censor some people, right? While also loudly saying it's not okay. They think it's not okay to have book bans, but murdering writers, there's no bigger ban than that, right? So, and if you don't want to talk about that, to me, I think that that's really the thing on purpose that a lot of these write-ups about what is happening with PEN, these people are being obtuse about, which is that how does this organization function? People have to buy into it. People are just not buying it, that's all. There's no big conspiracy, it's just people are not buying it. And I think that is because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Thank you. Viet, I'm going to hand it over to you. So the cancellation of your event at the 92nd Street Y back in October was one of the first big predictors of what was to come in cultural spaces. I'm wondering if you can share with us what your experience has been like after that, and whether or not speaking out about Palestine has impacted the promotion of your work, including the HBO production of The Sympathizers.
Right. So, I mean, even before the October cancellation, I'd already also participated in the Palestine Rights Festival at UPenn in September. And that was already, I think that was even an earlier indicator, because I was the only person on the stage, because there was also supposed to be Roger Waters and Gary Young, and both of them had to zoom in because Gary's visa from the UK was canceled the day of his appearance, and Roger Waters is, Roger Waters. When my cancellation happened, the reason why it happened was because I had signed in mid-October a letter with 750 other writers demanding a ceasefire, which at that point was enormously controversial. And now, 8 months later, I don't think it is very controversial anymore. Now we've moved the baseline to a certain degree where at least the liberal to the left part of the United States and much of the rest of the world says, yes, ceasefire is reasonable. But in mid-October, it wasn't. And also, I also posted on my Instagram that I still believed in BDS. And that might have been really the other thing that helped to get me canceled at the 92nd Street Y. It was a very stressful time afterwards for a few months as other things got canceled, and other opportunities that I may never have heard of also probably never materialized either. But what was really important for me about this whole experience has been the fact that it reaffirms my conviction about solidarity. Because as certain doors might have closed for me, many other doors opened, such as this door right here with all of you to speak about this event. And I think we've heard from the entertainment panel and from this panel too, that what we're facing here around the question of Gaza, but also Palestine in general, and the war, Israel's war on Gaza, is a litmus test about where our politics happen to stand. And I think for the entertainment world and for the literary world, the distinction has been that the notion of politics has been completely upended. Before October 7th and before what's been happening, you could be liberal and left in the world of entertainment and the arts and literature and speak up about multiculturalism and representation, and you would totally get rewarded for that. And that was interpreted as being courageous. And now, in retrospect, we know that's actually not very courageous, because everybody talks about multiculturalism and representation and diversity, but are you willing to take a stand on genocide and war? And I think one of the things that this reveals, and I think this is what is so radicalizing about this past 8 months, is that you cannot separate the domestic politics of the United States, its inequities, its contradictions, its oppressions, from what the United States does in terms of foreign policy outside of this country. And so I actually welcome being canceled in retrospect. I didn't welcome it then, but I've welcomed being canceled in retrospect because it's encouraged me to, again, emphasize solidarity, sharpen my analysis of how what's been happening with Palestine, with Israel, the war and the production of refugees, all these things are connected across space and also connected across time. So I'm a refugee from a war in Vietnam, in Southeast Asia, and that war was enormously radicalizing for very parallel reasons to what's happening now, that you cannot separate, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, the exploitation and oppression of black people in the United States from the fact that poor men and black men are being sent to fight a racist war in Southeast Asia. That's the way he was articulating it. That was actually the most radicalizing part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s journey. And in retrospect, that part of Martin Luther King's radicalization and his emphasis on radical solidarity has been whitewashed from the American memory. We would much rather remember I Have a Dream than Beyond Vietnam, which was a speech that he gave in 1967.
So my next few questions are for everyone here. And so I feel like you guys should all jump in because you have really wonderful things to say. And so speaking of the Vietnam War, I feel like a lot of the way that I've been calming my nerves in the last few months is just reading nonfiction. I don't know if that's like deranged. Like I just can't handle fiction right now. Like it's just I can't do it. Like I keep trying and I'm like, oh, seems nice, but I don't care about your boyfriend. I really don't. I don't want one either. But I actually have been reading a lot about the Vietnam War, and I think the student protests also really made me think about that, and I'm sure a lot of people here too have been thinking about that moment. I think it's really interesting to see the resurgence of an internationalist movement after so long. Why do you all think this happened now? Whoever wants to take it. Definitely not me. I asked the question.
I don't know, but I just wanted to share something. It's just a map of Israel's LA area accomplices. General Atomics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and Bay Systems, Collins Aerospace, Leonardo DRS, Collins Aerospace, Boeing, BAE Systems, Moore, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, AeroVironment, and more Lockheed Martin, Northrop. If you live in Simi Valley, Santa Clarita, Palmdale, Pasadena, El Segundo, LA, Long Beach, Santa Ana, possibly Compton. And you want to talk later? Hit me up. But I've been visited by Fuckboys International, is what I call them, FBI, a few times. So this is a performance. I just want to say this is just me performing. Don't really mean what I just said. And I don't know internationalists. Like I smoke a lot of weed. I just think everyone is fucking fed up. Like we are pissed. Like most of us are broke. It's hard to have a home. It's hard to find love, I hear. I'm good. Shout out to my incredible partner who's been holding me while I weep for the last 8 months. And yeah, it's just been, everyone is just fucking fed up. And I think that there's good fiction out there, Sada, but I'm so much more interested in like in weirdo, like futurist, sci-fi, just reimaginings of what the world can be. I think that's, and I'm with you, Yahya, I want Ayan too. It's boring, but I feel like
I was just talking about how much I sleep. I'm excused. I would.
Okay, well, I will ask you guys another question. Not every question works. Okay, Do writers and artists have a duty to be agents of change and or political actors? What should that look like?
Okay. I think someone in the first panel said something like that. I think it's being an artist, and I want to say being a writer, does essentially mean that you have to absorb, this is word to word, I hope I'm saying this right, to absorb the reality, but also give it back to people, like in a form of art or literature. So, and this is the thing, like, what do we write about? What do we make art about, if not social issues and political issues and things like that? I really ask this question, but unfortunately, we see many writers and many artists who are just, they just think that art and writing can be very isolated from reality. But art should reflect reality, and reality should reflect, like, influences art. So I don't know what kind of world they're living in or want us to live in, if they're not actually talking about issues, and if they're not, it actually also challenges, like, it questions their, I want to say IQ, and like, it's like, yeah, like, how can you not care about something if you're an artist? Like, what does it mean? Like, I really don't know any other definition of being an artist or a writer. Like, the issues and these problems actually give birth to art and writing. So, like, what's the value of art? This is why I think right now, and I feel the same thing, it's very hard to look at a lot of art and a lot of fiction, and also a lot of poetry. It's very hard because it doesn't live up to these moments of crisis and these moments of horror. They don't, like, many of them don't. And there is also, this is where you also remember, and like, this is a great reminder, like, times of crisis is a great reminder also of, like, how many there are so much unnecessary art and writing, and so many hyped up artists and writers, who, like, and this should be like the test. Like, here's the test. I think you're a hyped up artist, or I think you're a hyped up writer, and you showed me the answer. You stayed silent, so you're really IQ low. It's so, like, this is, yeah, it's bad in all fronts. Like, no matter how you look at it, it's really bad, and it shows the kind of person you are. So I really think it's very hard to separate the person from their art and their writings. But many people, unfortunately, want to do that, and many people also do art and do writing, unfortunately, in this country more than any other place that I've noticed. They do art and writing just for the money and just for the publicity and everything like that. And when I attended an international program, I actually heard it. Like, people were introducing themselves and saying, "Oh, I got in this field because when I first tried it by an accident, it generated a lot of money or generated a lot of publicity, so I liked that." And when you actually look at these people's art and writing, they're actually so bad. So bad. If you're an artist or you want to be an artist and you're in it for money and publicity, these are, like, literally the last two things you should worry about. Really, yeah. real artists and real writers actually lose money and publicity for.
I love that. I really love that answer. And just to draw one distinction, I mean, there's a role for writers and artists to speak out like we're speaking up. You know, like you write essays and op-eds and give speeches and so on, which is one definition of the political. But the other definition is, you know, actually taking politics and infusing them into the art and the kind of challenges that that raises. Because that to me is a really interesting challenge. Because at that level, it's not an easy one-to-one transposition between your political convictions and what your poem looks like or your novel. Or in my case, the TV series. And I'll use this as an example, the Sympathizer TV series. And I'm not just ruthlessly pitching it to you. It's just simply that I think of it as an extremely political TV series because it's based on a very political novel. And the director, Park Chan-wook, who's Korean, when he was asked why did a Korean choose to adopt a Vietnamese written novel, he said, well, Korea and Vietnam, we both share these common histories of imperialism, colonization, war, and so on. He might have been the only director in my recent memory, mainstream director, who said the word imperialism at, you know, a red carpet debut of a TV series. And, you know, the problem with the Sympathizer TV series, however, is that it has no dragons. It has no samurai. It has no Game of Thrones. You know, so there's a huge difference between the entertainment that you're describing with and a certain kind of multicultural art that pretends to be political, like you're saying, is in fact just entertainment of a certain kind. And so when you talk about political art, I mean, art that's really political is going to unsettle people, and they're not necessarily going to want to spend 7 hours in front of a TV when they just want to watch dragons and sorcerers. Nothing wrong with dragons and sorcerers, nothing wrong with that. But the audience is going to choose the entertainment usually over the politics. So there's still a real price to be paid at that level for having a conviction as an artist who wants to be political at the same time.
I would just add that in my experience, some of the people who talk the most about like separating art and politics actually have the most nefarious politics in their art. I always think about, there's a Jonathan Franzen interview wherein he said, you know, like I stay in my lane, I don't write about race in America because I don't know about race in America. And I'm like, I've learned so much about white people in America from your novels. What do you mean you don't write about race in America? White people, y'all are raced, right? Like you don't want to be, but you are, and you are communicating your like values and your culture, etc. You're sometimes aggressing us with it in your art, but that it sort of walks through the world marauding as neutral when it is anything but neutral, which I think we've seen so much of that in the past like 8 months, how people can say this art is not about anything, but everything that it omits is telling us something. Every choice that is decided it doesn't have to make is telling us something about what it values.
So I just realized that we're sitting one Palestinian, every other Palestinian. Did not do that intentionally. Viet and Angela, for you guys as non-Palestinians, I'd love to have you guys maybe speak a little bit about, you know, the significance of Palestine in connection to your own communities, and you know, why Palestine does have that connection to your personal.
Well, Viet touched on it. When you brought up MLK and some of his most, you know, controversial beliefs were the ones that were making these sort of international connections about oppression in this country and oppression outside of this country, and the ways that African Americans are, like, our oppression is connected to these like global oppressions. And for me, as somebody who has like read these works, one thing I think that people should read if you're interested particularly in the like connection between Black liberation and Palestinian liberation is the most recent issue of Hammer and Hope, which is free online. It's amazing. There's just several really great essays there, one from Angela Davis, which she talks about Palestine being a litmus test and like her sort of 50-year journey with understanding the place that Palestinian liberation plays, like in a conversation about global liberation. And there's also a great article by Robin D.G. Kelley in there about particularly Black liberation, like African American sort of liberation movements and South African liberation movements and Palestinian liberation movements, and the ways that there are so many parallels, particularly, you know, in the era of South African apartheid, Israel was one of its biggest supporters, in addition to the United States, and that's an interesting triangle to be made. And why that was is because those three places had an interest in, after everybody was, you know, getting rid of their colonies, they were not interested in doing that, right? They had an interest in both philosophically but also economically supporting each other and each other's colonial projects. And I think that that's something that for me, as I just have become more interested in Black writers of the past, I realized that these are connections that have been made for a while. And while they're not the same, I think there's overlaps. And I also think, though, one thing the past 8 months have really shown me is the way that many Black Americans have found a comfortable place within oppression in this country, and the ways that they have been, quite frankly, happy to be foot soldiers for this empire. And I think that's something that deserves interrogation. And also, there's literature that explores that and has been exploring that for the last 60 years.
In Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech Beyond Vietnam, he points out that there's this ironic, brutal solidarity that white and Black American soldiers had in fighting the war in Vietnam. So the solidarity they couldn't find in the United States, they found fighting an imperial war. You know, I'm Vietnamese, I'm Asian American, and in both of those cases, there's this kind of a tension, I think, around politics and around the relationship to Palestine that's important to draw out. Because if you go back to the Vietnam War, there certainly was a moment when Vietnam and Palestine were aligned if you were a leftist, a communist, a revolutionary, and you saw these mutually reinforcing efforts at national liberation and revolution. However, I come from the Vietnamese refugee community, which lost the war and was not happy about these projects of national liberation and revolution. And so it's actually not a pro-Palestinian community for the most part, the conservative side of the Vietnamese community. So as a Vietnamese American writer, oftentimes I find myself in antagonism to my own community. And that's another definition of politics. It's not simply standing up against the majority or against a majority consensus, but sometimes standing up against the consensus of your own community, which can be quite painful to do. I mean, I did an event recently, and this young Vietnamese American woman came up to me, and she's a supporter of my work, but she said, "You are the second most hated person in my parents' household." The most hated person, Joe Biden. But sometimes, you know, you do actually have to take that stand against your own community when you know your community is doing wrong. Now, when it comes to the Asian American community, generally a liberal and leftist community, you know, the origins are from the late 1960s, very radical, as a lot of Asian Americans like to say. But today, especially in the Hollywood world, I mean, the Asian American mainstream is now not so much anti-imperialist, anti-racist, anti-war, anti-capitalism as it was in 1968. The mainstream of the Asian American community is representation, inclusion, diversity, all these kinds of things, which are great for more Asian American faces in TV series and things like this, but there's a vacuity there, there's a vacuousness there, I think, that's demonstrated around Palestine and that particular kind of litmus test. So as an Asian American, I feel the need to call out my own, you know, fellow Asian Americans at the same time and say, Palestine is in Asia. If we recognize that we built this Asian American community out of a notion of solidarity between people who don't seem alike, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnamese, Filipinos, and so on and so forth, where do we stop? Where does solidarity stop? Where does our identification stop? And I think that's the challenge that the Asian American communities face now, is that it's easy to stop our solidarity around this now comfortable notion of being Asian American that doesn't include West and Southwest Asia. And I think that we actually do need to include West and Southwest Asia and these kinds of politics. That's the more radical form of kinship and solidarity that I think could animate the Asian American mainstream, but so far has not.
I also just wanted to say that one other sort of point of connectivity when we're talking about these kinds of not the same, but certainly rhyming like systems of oppression is what a lot of people have been talking about lately, which is on the sort of the policing and militarization front. The things that we are seeing really in Gaza, so much technology that is being used to annihilate people is technology that so many of our police departments are very interested in, right? Like these quadcopters that can just shoot people are technologies that we are not only just funding all over that map and developing that map that Randa showed, but also that we are unfortunately learning from. I think it would be really naive to think that people are not in this country learning from what is happening in Gaza and the ways that oppression is already here, but will continue to just come back. The way that our police forces get trained with the IOF, all of that comes back to us, and the way that more and more cop cities are becoming on the sort of like proposal list for cities across the country so that they can become even more militarized. All of those things are connected. So when the students are talking about defunding, the threat is not just, oh, because they won't be able to do genocides elsewhere, but it's like, oh, we won't be funding these organizations that are also subjugating the populations here.
So we have time for one more question. And so this, like Erij did in the entertainment panel, we can do a rapid fire. Randa, I loved what you were saying about, science fiction and like imagining futures. I think for each of you, I also want to ask what gives you hope and what sort of like, what about the future motivates you? What kind of future are you sort of fighting for? Randa, do you want to start?
Yeah, I've been writing seriously for 30 years and publishing for 25. And I never, ever thought that the New York war crimes would exist. Like, just that fucking paper brings me hope. The ways that people are finally saying enough is giving me hope. Going out and protesting with folks, shutting down highways, not that I've done that personally. Just getting into mischief, all sorts of mischief that is so directly connected to my ancestry, the way that being reminded and reading about people in my family, reading about Palestine and the places where my great-grandmothers were from. These were, men and women who were illiterate, but poets. And I used to think as a Muslim drinking a beer that, that Muhammad was the only poet who was illiterate, right? And so to know that there's this other type of literacy that's going on generally, and to know that we went from there, our people went from there to being one of the most highly literate people in the world, and meeting up with these families in Cairo and hearing the mothers talk about what we're gonna do after the war. And that's what they call it. They call it the war and the genocide. So thinking about what we're gonna do after this, how are we gonna rebuild, Shout out to people who are like learning how to make earth domes, just weirdo architecture, people who are aware that if you are not getting arrested, you're not doing it right. People who are putting their lives on the line, their careers, like who the fuck cares, Like people are fucking dying. People are constantly being thrown in jail. The water in Atlanta, I think, was cut off today. This piece of shit president of ours just shut down a fake fucking border. It's just, knowing that all of this information is coming out and we're going to rebuild, we're going to build a school, and it's just going to be so much work. But I don't know if hope is the right word, but just, I think that's what gets me out of bed. And I'm only out of bed, Yahya, I'm with you. I'm out of bed like 6 hours a day. So.
This room gives me hope. Just thinking about the events, like for instance, I've done with Penn, the room has not looked like this. And I think what gives me hope is the fact that so many of us have been able to find each other, and that so many people have realized that there's no reason to hide, and that when we stand together, we can change things. So I have a lot of hope.
I have a big problem with hope. I feel like let me start by this. I think what will give me hope is what you guys will do after this event. Thank you. I wanna, and please let me know, like I wanna hear things that you do, actions that you take after such events. We don't wanna just meet and have a good time and talk and laugh and cheer and then go back to your houses and just forget about it. These events and these, like I've done many readings, I've been doing so many readings since the beginning of the genocide, like more than 30 now, and I was just reading yesterday at UCLA. And I always leave audiences with this message. It's about what you will do after attending this reading or this event. And I always say, don't look for hope in my words. Give me hope with your actions. So I really hope that you will continue to take action, and I really hope that this conversation inspired you to take more action, because actions are what we need right now. And it's not the passive actions, or it's not the very indirect actions. We have a lot of direct actions that we can take to stop what's happening. I also wanted to say the founders of Israel used to say, referring to Palestinians, the old Palestinians will die and the young will forget. Surprise. But when I say, I was just thinking about that because I feel like I have a lot of despair and anger at old white people in this country, like Joe Biden and so forth. And I feel like, I think the old white people here, when they die, I have hope with the young people. The young people will not forget. And it's actually many old white people, supremacists, are standing in the way of young people. You see young people in the encampments, and you see very old, very creepy white people in Congress. So I just wanted to talk about old people here and remind you of what the founders of Israel said. Just, you do the rest. Yeah, and also I wanted to say, since this is my third day in Los Angeles, in UCLA, and wherever I walk around UCLA, I don't know when was the last time you went to UCLA or visited, I felt like there's something that kind of feels like home, but I wasn't sure if it's like negative or positive. And then I was realized, oh my God, I think when I walk in UCLA, I feel, it feels like home in a way, in a negative way, because I kid you not, every 10 feet or something, there is security people, cops, security from the university and other companies and stuff. And they are in twos, like every 10 feet. And this is the fear moment that felt like home in a negative way, because, and I remembered when I was walking in Jerusalem, and this was the only time I was allowed to visit Jerusalem. Every 10 feet, you will find soldiers or cops just hanging around, like they're there like tourists, but they're not. They're there ready to take action and kill people and imprison them and everything. So and I was shocked. Like UCLA, I was really excited to visit, but it's full of cops and full of security people. So I was like, is this a university? Like, is this what universities are like right now? Is this what the US wants education to look like? Are these cops in some years are gonna be the professors? Is this what, like, the image that you're trying to paint, that cops and security people belong on campus in this heavy number? Like, if I wanted to count, like, I will count 100 security people, cops and all of them in UCLA. Like, how many are there? Everywhere I went. And sometimes, like, they will walk past you and, like, you have to be careful and, like, don't hit them or, like, don't, you know, I don't know, like, it's very scary. UCLA is very scary in that way. But I hope that students this year and next year and every year in UCLA show the world what the US government is about, what they want to do to education, how they want to hurt education. So yeah, I hope that students continue to give us hope, and I hope when they get out of, like, when they graduate, I hope that they will give us hope everywhere in big corporations and big companies and Congress. They will replace these Congress people.
Well, you know, as you were saying, I mean, the power of literature is that it makes us feel, it makes us empathetic, and then the deceptive part of literature is that then it allows us not to do anything. Right. But for those of us who think of ourselves as political artists, I don't think we think of ourselves in isolation. We think of ourselves in relationship to community, to solidarity, and in that sense, literature is actually not isolated. I mean, I think of myself as a Vietnamese American writer, Asian American writer, but on all these identities, I have communities. And, you know, as a Vietnamese and Asian American writer, my existence would not be possible without all of these social and political movements that came before and made openings for me to exist. And so that's where I draw hope, you know, from this idea that there have always been movements throughout American history and other countries' histories of resistance, right, that have provided the openings for us today. And this gives me hope because otherwise my view of American history, just speaking of this country, is pretty grim. Because we're a country that's founded on ideals of freedom and democracy and so on and so forth, but we're also a country founded on colonization, enslavement, war, genocide. All of that is true, all at the same time. And that's why we see these cyclical events in history, Vietnam War, Palestine, these are repetitions of the same contradiction. But what's also a repetition is the resistance. There was a huge movement of resistance against the war in Vietnam, that was national and that was global, and now we're seeing that same repetition of resistance. That gives me hope.
Thank you all so much. Let's give them one more round of applause, please. Thank you, guys.